Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on preparing for Ofsted using Renaissance Place. And welcome to Leslie Humphries, who's come as our guest speaker for today. Liz has extensive experience in education, and she's going to share all that knowledge and experience with you today for the webinar. Before we go straight into our session today, we need to cover a few housekeeping rules. So we're going to be looking at what needs to take place. Now, you are somewhat familiar with the chat, but we are going to look at some of the other features that are available to you. So on the right-hand side of your screen, you will find the attendee list. And below your attendee list, you have some icons. You have a little hand that can be raised if you need to ask a question urgently. Alternatively, you can type the question into the chat box down below. You also have ticks and crosses, and we're just going to test these out very briefly. So if you could please just give me a tick to let me know if you've done any star testing this term, or give me a cross to let me know if you haven't yet run your star tests for this term. Right, everybody's been testing. Fantastic, all ticks. Great, so we're just going to clear that. You also have just to the right of that, you'll see little emoticons. So if you click down the drop-down menu, you'll find a range of emoticons. And if you could tell us how your star testing ran this term using one of those emoticons. I'm seeing some smiling faces. Fantastic. So it seems as though it's gone well. Great. All good with your star test this term. That's excellent news. Fantastic. So we then also have our little chat box down the bottom. And you can see the option to set it to all participants is highlighted. So please ensure that you have it set to all participants when sending to the chat. And either myself or my colleague Jessamy or Terry will be on hand to answer your questions. If we're unable to answer any questions at that point in time that may be directed to Leslie, we will save those questions and have some time at the end of the webinar to address any specific questions. So just to give it another little practice, could you please tell us what your position is within the school, or if you're a class teacher, what year you'll be teaching, and if you could type that into the little chat box down below, that would be great. Sue, the assistant head, thank you, Sue. English teacher, year 6, great, thank you, Hannah. English coordinators, the assistant head, fantastic. AR lead, great. Fantastic. So it's good to see that you're familiar with the chat box. Please do use it through the webinar. I'm going to hand you back over to Leslie, and I'll come back to you at a later stage where we'll then explore a few other features that are available or is available within the webinar. So please hold while I hand you over to Leslie Humphries.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me, and thanks very much for joining us this afternoon. It's really good to be with you all, and I hope you've got certainly a cup of tea or coffee handy, and possibly something very sugary, just to keep those sugar levels up for the next time that we're together at the end of a long day. I hope it hasn't been too hard a day for you. So the purpose of the session this afternoon is to have a look at some aspects of the Ofsted framework for inspection, and to see how your AR data and Renaissance Place can help you to provide data and evidence that can be useful for Ofsted. So the first slide you can see there is saying, how familiar are you with the new inspection framework? So in the chat box, perhaps you would just like to say how familiar you are. 1, if you don't know anything much about it. 5, if you know every paragraph off by heart. I can see Hannah is not very familiar for you. Chris? Chris, hello. I think we met before at Balliol. Nice to have you with us this afternoon. Lucy's a 2. Yes, thanks, Chris. Yes, good to hear. Good to see you at the other end of there. I can put a face to a name, which is really lovely. Okay, that's great. Thanks, everyone. So we have a range of knowledge. So what we hope to do this afternoon, as I say, is to help you become more familiar, and particular to highlight key aspects of the documents and how they link with Renaissance and what we can do to support your inspections through the use of our data. So the new Common Inspection Framework, drafted in 2015 and then slightly modified in 2016, the most critical difference to this framework to previous ones is that all of the judgments are common to different remits across education. So whether you're early years, primary, secondary, or in further education, there is a consistency now in the inspection framework and a consistency, therefore, in the judgments. So if there's that consistency available, that means that if you are working with maybe a group of schools in an academy chain, you might be part of a cluster, you might be in some form of federation, or you're working with Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 together, or primary, lower, middle and high, then there could be a possibility of demonstrating your practice in a very consistent way across phases. So something to think about is, if you are involved in good practice with your accelerated reader, how can you possibly share that with other schools in your area, and do you share that already? And we have a whiteboard function that Liesel's going to explain to you now, and we'd like you to put your comments onto that. Liesel's just going to explain the whiteboard, and then I'll show you a key question that we'd like you to have a go at answering. So I'll hand over to Liesel.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, great. So at the top, toward the top left side of your screen, you'll see the feature to use the whiteboard. Let me just highlight that for you. Right, so it comes up, you'll see the arrow, and if I can ask you to please click on this arrow and click along on the screen in front of you, you should find your arrow coming up. Great, fantastic. And I'm going to ask you to do that again very quickly. Again, click onto the screen with your arrow. Then towards the top left, you'll see T for text tool. If you then click onto text tool and click alongside that arrow, next to your name, and type hello. Great, thank you, Jess. Type hello, hi, how are you doing? Anything, just something to indicate. Once you've typed your text, then click away, click elsewhere on the slide or on the screen, and your text should then appear. Fantastic. Hannah, Terry's the only one not typing, but we're all good. Fantastic. So we'll be using this tool, and you'll be feeding back to Leslie. I'm going to pass you back over to Leslie to give you that question right now. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, so if we're thinking about how we can work with phases, before and after us using our AR data, then it's really important to demonstrate the practice that we're doing to Ofsted, because one of the key statements in the new framework is that we have to ensure that learners get a good start and are well prepared for the next stage of education, training or employment. So if we are liaising with colleagues in phases prior to or after hours, then we're helping to demonstrate that we're involved in that development of a good start and are well prepared. And certainly if you've got reading age data and all the other data you get from Accelerated Reader that you can pass on to colleagues in different stages, then that can be really helpful. So if I show you the next slide, Liesel will talk you through. Perhaps you could click on and you can talk about, drop down how you could share data with colleagues if you don't already do so, or if you do share with colleagues in other institutions, then perhaps you can show that and explain what you do just to share some practice. Thanks very much.
Thanks. So if you can grab that arrow again and then click and find a line on the slides, on the whiteboard, a free line, and once you've got your line, select text and type your text away alongside the arrow where your name is, And remember that once you've typed your text, to then click off and click elsewhere on the screen for the text to appear. If you are having any problems with the whiteboard, please feel free to type your feedback into the chat box and send it through to all participants. Great. Sue and Hannah have managed to feed back to us. Martin, if anyone else wants to feedback, let us know. And we'll hand you back over to Leslie. Thank you.
That's great. So thank you, people who've put some feedback up there. Hannah says the school we feed into also uses AR, so you share information. That's really important. And of course, as you know, there are many, many, many schools using Accelerated Reader now, and some schools even are using it in Key Stage 1. Others, obviously, if you're feeding into secondary schools, then it's really useful to be able to pass that data on to them, especially if they also have AR. Using your transition meetings with feeder secondary schools, absolutely critical. That's really helpful to the secondary schools to get any of your AR data. And if you have partner schools at staff meetings, as Martin has said, again, another very useful idea. If you have joint training days, that could be another place where you could share ideas. And if we think about the more consistent inspections are, then the more consistency there is between our phases and our groups and clusters of school, then that can be really, really helpful. So thanks very much for that feedback. That's really great. So another key point that Ofsted brings out is about the groups of learners that they're going to be looking at. And if you look at the headings of the slides, you'll see that often in brackets it says CIF and then a number. That refers to the paragraph in the Common Inspection Framework where the information comes from. So in discussions of groups of learners, we know Ofsted has been tracking groups of learners for some considerable time now, but one of the things that we now have is a list of actually 20 categories of learners that they might be tracking. Some only might apply to your school, others, some might, all 20 might apply. So we know things about pupil premium, free school meals, special education needs, but there are all sorts of other characteristics that are being tracked. And I don't know how many of you use characteristics in Accelerated Reader, but that's something that really can help you. Perhaps you can use the tick or the cross and show whether or not you use the characteristics in Accelerated Reader in order to track your children and how they're doing. So if you do use and you know what characteristics are, then can you give me a tick? And if you don't, then can you give me a cross? So I can see Martin uses his, but most people don't. So it may be that you're not particularly familiar with those, or you haven't got around to using those next. They're very simple to set up, and you can create any categories that you want in the characteristics section. You'll find the way to set them up is in the users part of Renaissance Place. And if you're not sure how to do it, don't forget there's live chat on your Renaissance website. Contact the office, use the help menus. So if you use characteristics, you can enable every class teacher in your school, and then for more strategic purposes, you're able to track all those key groups that Ofsted want to see are the gaps being closed, which is another key theme for the document. So I encourage you to investigate characteristics, because you'll be able to say how your pupil premium students are doing compared to your non-pupil premium, and so on and so forth. You can also group children as well as have them in their class. And if you want to look at sort of looking at different ability groups, so who are your most able readers or not, you can use the ranking option in the summary report. So these are some features in your Renaissance Place setup that you may not be using yet, but can be really helpful for showing how different groups of learners are making the progress that Ofsted is looking for. And it gives you evidence at the touch of a button, which is always there. So I'm going to move on now and have a look at the key judgments that Ofsted makes and how Renaissance Place can help you with those. So, of course, the overall judgment is that of overall effectiveness. And all the evidence from the other judgments are used together to create the overall effectiveness judgment. And currently, we still have the same scale 1 to 4 as far as Ofsted is concerned, from outstanding heading down, good, requires improvement, and inadequate, and so on. So again, just as a bit of information which is useful for me to have, can you just say let me know with a tick or a cross if, because Ofsted is looking to see what is it like to be a user of your provision, how many of you perhaps ask your students, your children, you know, for their feedback? Do you take the student view? Do you monitor your AR sessions as well as you might monitor any other aspect of practice in school? A tick or a cross or a comment in chat around that would be great. So I can see Chris, yes, is doing some monitoring and so on. Lucy, yes. Hannah, not familiar in your school. Martin, no. Sue, no. So one of the things I would say, thank you for that feedback, is that whatever you do with regard to quality assurance in your school for teaching and learning and the other aspects of Ofsted, then I encourage you to do the same thing as far as AR is concerned. I can see it from Hannah in chat. She says that you use a lot of pupil voice but hadn't thought of this for AR. It's really important, I think, to help AR to become really integral in the work that you do in the school, and that it's just included in every other aspect of school. So if you report to parents, you report to parents about AR. If you're monitoring the quality of teaching and learning, then you do the same in your AR sessions. And we'll pick up on that further as we go through the afternoon. So the 4 categories that we're familiar with is effectiveness of leadership and management, nothing new there. Number 2, slightly amended, quality of teaching, learning and assessment. So the highlight on assessment really critical. And of course that's where Renaissance Place and Accelerated Reader can really help you because of the assessment data that it provides you. Personal development, behaviour and welfare, slightly amended from what we've seen previously. And number 4 is the outcomes for children. So we're going to have a look at effectiveness of leadership and management now, and the judgment for that is in section 28 of the Common Inspection Framework, and there are lots of key points and things that they're looking for to see how effective leadership and management is. And what I've done is highlighted a few of the sort of key questions that I would ask myself around this particular judgment from Ofsted. And I think one of the most important things to be aware of are the key words that Ofsted uses when they're writing in these judgments. So, for example, what is your ambitious vision for literacy? Because they talk about having leaders and managers having ambitious vision. So, if you're in primary, you're going to have a vision for literacy in your school, but is AR part of that vision for literacy, or is it something that's sort of separate? The more integral you can make it, I think the more holistic the whole literacy environment for young people is in your school. Have you outlined training in your CPD plan? Our recent training with colleagues around AR in schools, particularly if you're involved in the Education Endowment Foundation project, is very much about the need for ongoing training. So we provide lots of additional training and support for you via these webinars and workshops. And so are you making sure that that training is really highlighted and that all your staff are aware and that you're supporting them throughout the year with their training as far as AR is concerned? I think the next point picks up another one of these key Ofsted words. And my question is, how are you demonstrating robust self-assessment and modification of practice based on it to support sustainable improvement. So for me, I'm highlighting the word robust and the word sustainable. So how are you using your AR data to show that you are robust in your self-assessment? Are you using your data from your STAR testing to give you information in order to plan interventions? Are you using it to show, to add to your progress data that you can show however you or your authority or your academy chain likes you to do that? Are you able to demonstrate that you have done AR in a certain way, then looked at the data and then modified your practice in order to improve it? These are all of the kind of things that you can be asking yourself, but thinking about it in the context of accelerated reader. Another very strong strand coming through the whole document is the promotion of diversity and narrowing gaps between groups of children and learners. And the whole diversity question comes through very, very strongly, and the importance of having programs that meet young people's needs. So here are some tips that might be helpful to you in order to give you some support in developing that effectiveness in leadership and management with regard to accelerated reader. We have examples of literacy plans, reading policies that can help you set out those ambitious expectations. They might give you some ideas to add to or expand on what you've already got. Ensure that AR is linked into your overall improvement strategy and that you are showing how you are using that data. Many schools have started to use accelerated reader data as part of their targets for teachers in performance management, because it's very easy to see the impact that AR is having on the children in their classes, and it's a way of looking at that aspect of performance management around reading that can be very useful as far as leadership and management is concerned in the school. As I said, we have webinars and workshops. We also have a more intensive development program where schools are able to work in more detail with consultants from Renaissance. And there's also something you might like to look into, and that's the development of achieving masterclass and master school status, all of which is showing that you are implementing effective reading through accelerated reader in a really powerfully effective way. We also have a progress monitoring tool for your interventions. I'll pick up on that a little bit later, that can also be useful to you. A couple of other aspects here to pick up. I mentioned the importance of the diversity comment that's come through as a strong strand. And one of the things to look at is to think, are your books really reflecting a very multicultural society? Even if we're not in an area that has an enormous diversity of population, does our book stock reflect the diversity that our students might not come face to face with? Because that's showing how you are supporting your young people and promoting that diversity, even if they're not in a particularly diverse environment themselves. Are you identifying non-fiction and fiction that can be relevant to other aspects across the curriculum that fit in with your subjects and your projects? If you have special needs students in your school, do you have any particular support for their reading, large print, audio books, digital, as well as paper books, that sort of thing? And again, just to pick up on our use of characteristics and so on that I mentioned before, remember, make sure you're tracking those groups, and Ofsted is going to want to see your high attaining groups as well as your low attaining groups. You might also like to use surveys or questionnaires with staff and pupil on occasions to track the kind of soft data that's looking at things like confidence, self-esteem, ability to offer opinions, that kind of thing, to show that children are able to talk about their learning and to talk about their reading in detail, because this is something that comes up through the document as well. So I hope you find that there's a few tips there that might be of use to you. So let's have a look now at the quality of teaching, learning and assessment. So the judgment, again, I picked out a few highlights of things that I think are really useful for us to point out how AR can help you and how Renaissance Place can help you. High expectations, including the most able and disadvantaged. You can demonstrate using Renaissance Place and using Accelerated Reader and points targets that you are setting very high expectations. You can have targets for children in terms of reading ages, in terms of achieving norm reference scores that are above what's expected for their age. You can also demonstrate whether they're achieving their high expectations in targets for any interventions. And of course, in Accelerated Reader, you can use the points targets. It would be useful to see how many people actually use the points targets. So perhaps you would give me a cross or a tick if you use the points targets in Accelerated Reader yet for your children, because they are a very powerful thing and really helpful. I can see Lucy and Martin are, but not everyone is. Again, if you're fairly early on in your development of Accelerated Reader, you probably are still managing the nitty-gritty day-to-day things currently. But if you've been a user for a little bit longer, then, you know, really after the first term, I would encourage you to use those points targets for children, because you can demonstrate your high expectations using those targets. And if the children are achieving their points targets, then it's giving you a good indicator that they're going to get growth at your next STAR test. Also, if you set the points targets, you'll also get an engaged time score appearing on your diagnostic reading report, and that will also be an indicator of whether the reading is having impact. And you know, the one thing that Ofsted is always asking is, how do you know? What is the impact? So you might want to investigate that in the coming weeks, possibly then to use after half term if you're able to, or after Christmas, because the sooner you can work on those with the pupils, the more focused your formative assessment with the children can be, and the more helpful your data will be to demonstrate to Ofsted that you are having high expectations and they're being achieved. Securing understanding and subject knowledge, I raise that purely from the fact that in terms of Accelerated Reader, it's important to ensure that all colleagues are familiar with using the main elements of the software and that they're using it consistently amongst your staff. And that's where the training can be very helpful. You know, having Accelerated Reader as a standing item on staff meeting agendas, to have time during training days so colleagues can meet and develop their practice and share good practice, is something that really helps them develop their understanding of AR, and therefore they're going to ensure that the children get the best possible experience as well. Obviously, assessment information is easily gathered from the programme, from STAR and from Accelerated Reader. So you are clearly understanding what they know. You've got access to what things they're capable of doing in the national curriculum from the STAR test. Engagement with parents and carers and employers, or parents and carers in particular, is always something that's critical to help engage where sometimes it's impossible to get them through the doors, but if you can, then it really helps them to see their children actually working with accelerated reader. One thing that I know some schools have started to do, particularly in the primary group, to get parents in if they're a bit reluctant, is to have accelerated reader tea parties. The idea here is, because most parents quite like to come in for a cup of tea and a biscuit, and they also quite like to come in if they're going to see their own child doing something. And what you might consider doing is what some schools I know have done, whereby they put their reading time, say, for the last half hour at the end of the day. They call it an accelerated reader tea party. They have tea and biscuits on. The children do their reading. Parents come in, listen to their children reading. The children show them quizzing and so on and so forth. And that way, you can get the parents in. They like to see what their children are doing. If parents aren't very good readers, it doesn't matter, because they can just listen to their children reading in a very supportive and secure environment, because the children, in a sense, are training their parents and showing their parents what they can do. So quite a lot of ideas there. I hope that you could, perhaps take on board some of those. In STAR, I've already mentioned the points targets. We have a progress monitoring tool. This enables you to set up interventions and to show how well your children are developing and progressing to achieve the targets in their interventions. We have a webinar like this one coming up in December to enable you to get more ideas about how to involve in parents. And also, we have something called the Reading Dashboard, which I'll pick up later, which enables you to develop plans of exactly what to teach children next in the national curriculum. Because the STAR test is assessing the new national curriculum from 5 to 16, we're then able to use the data from that. And if you go into this feature of the reading dashboard, you're able to find growth plans that will suggest that what kinds of things to teach your children next. And it's really helpful, particularly for a child who may be stuck on a certain thing and you've tried everything you can think of and you're not sure how to push them on, and sometimes that can just give you that key idea of where there's a gap in their knowledge or something that they need to know more about. So a few ideas there for teaching and learning. I can see in chat there's been quite a lot of talk about the targets and the points, and there's more help. Don't forget to get the help from our RenLearn site. There's a customers area on that. If you go into the training part on the customers area, there are also some PowerPoints and videos which will take you through how to set up those points, targets and so on, and all the other aspects that I'm talking about this afternoon. So having had a look at leadership and management teaching, let's just pick up a few ideas around the third aspect that's looked at by Ofsted, the personal development, behaviour and welfare. So the judgment is in paragraph 30, and again I've picked out some key things that can be useful to think of that AR can really help you with. So one of the things they're looking for in the outstanding judgments is pride in achievement, commitment to learning and a positive culture. So this is about developing your consistency of approach with accelerated reader, particularly if you have it in right across your school. Are the children enthusiastic about their reading? Can they demonstrate that? Can they talk about AR, what it does for them, how they enjoy their books and so on? And, any aspects of the reading culture, and I'll pick up on that in a bit more detail. With regard to employability skills, we may not be thinking of those, particularly in the primary sector, but two of the key areas in employability skills are self-management and learning. So AR is very helpful in terms of getting children to take responsibility for their reading, ensuring they learn how to choose the most effective books for them, how to monitor their progress, and those all-important discussions that you have with them during the reading time, the assessment for learning conversations that you can have based on your diagnostic report and information that comes through from your record book and target section in Accelerated Reader. These things can really help your children to be able to discuss what they need to do in order to improve, and it helps them demonstrate how they know and understand their data and so on. So we're going to just have a little bit of a go again at the whiteboard. I can see lots of chat going on still. So if you're able to, then click on the whiteboard once again. I can see Hannah's there already. Thank you, Hannah. So click on that blue arrow on the top left-hand side of the screen. Thank you, Sue. And we're going to be thinking about this question, what do you already have in place in terms of building a reading culture and developing autonomous readers in your school? Or if you have any questions about how to build a reading culture, you might want to put them on the whiteboard as well. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to put those things in, and we can have a look at those all together. Thanks, Chris. I can see you're clicking on there. Talk about multitasking. I tell you, all this clicking in different places, it's a whole new world. So Hannah said we have just updated our library now that we have stickered books and each classroom has its own reading area. Anything from anyone else? How are you building your reading culture? You may feel you've got a really strong reading culture in your school. New books for classroom based on interests and reading levels. Something that it's very helpful to look at in terms of your children's interests and reading levels is to teach your kids how to use AR Book Finder. That's our free tool for searching for books that are quizzable. And if you go into the advanced search section, then you will be able to, children can use that to search for books that they're interested in as far as their reading levels, their ZPD level. The web address is www.arbookfind.co.uk, and one of the things that quite a few schools do is actually, if they do have money available for buying books, they encourage their children who are taking part in AR to go into AR Book Find to find a book that you haven't got in school that's within their ZPD area that they would like to have, and they actually buy that book in, and then sometimes what some schools do is they actually put a sticker in that book that says this book was bought for the library on the recommendation of, and then with the child's name. And that actually can be a really sort of big incentive. That can be really helpful and very positive. I can see Lucy has talked that she's got a reward system in place. Chris is saying each class has labelled book boxes. They can select their own books. Classroom display showing progress from Martin here. So one of the things that, if we have a look, if I show you the next slide, thank you very much everyone for those ideas. Here are some more ideas that you can see that might help you with developing a reading culture in your school. Obviously, the more time you give to AR and to reading, that is bound to help your culture. But the National Literacy Trust have a program called Reading Champions, which you may be or may not be familiar with. Reading Champions is a series of suggestions and ideas that is free to schools to get involved with, and Reading Champions helps you to develop children who are champions and who support reading and support other children, and they can get bronze, silver, gold and so on as reading champions, and that's a positive thing in other schools. If you actually look at your project time and think about finding books of fiction or non-fiction that support those other areas so that you can ensure that you've got a whole variety of things, non-fiction as well as fiction, that children can use. And say the more you can use your student voice to help you. I think some of you may well know about the favourite books report that you can get in the accelerated reader section on the website. And if you look at that favourite books report, you'll see the books that children have given 4 stars to, and that will enable you to see which books that children really enjoy. Other things that can help as far as developing the aspect of personal behaviour development and welfare is developing, again, that consistency in approach, using reading logs. There are lots of reading logs on our website. They're also in the resources section in Accelerated Reader on your website. Ensuring that children are able to discuss their books and to be able to talk about what they like about them, how their book works, what's the structure of their book, and they discuss their characters, all of the kind of things that you do in guided reading in primary schools. You can use their AR books for, and very often children, because they're so familiar with their AR books, are able very much to discuss in detail, you know, what they're reading in their AR books. I can see that on the chat, someone's mentioned the What Our Kids Are Reading document, and that will tell you, you know, books that many children are reading. And the more you can whip up enthusiasm through your competitions, through your rewards, through photographs, and, you know, what get caught reading photographs, those kind of things can really develop that reading culture in detail. So the fourth and final aspect, as far as the framework is concerned, are the outcomes for children and learners. So again, I'm just going to ask you a quick question, and this is whether or not any of you have looked in the reading dashboard, and or whether you are familiar with something called student growth percentiles, the SGPs. Can you tick if you know anything about this, or cross if you have never heard of it or really aren't familiar? I can see to most people this is new. Just a few comments about these particular things, because this is an aspect of the program that you can look to develop in the future with Accelerated Reader. Remember, we do talk about, you know, several years to develop AR to its absolute fullest extent, but understanding what you've got in the tool in Accelerated Reader is really helpful. So Ofsted talks about the fact that children should progress well from their different starting points and achieve or exceed standards expected for their age. So one of the things that we're able to do to help you in demonstrating this to Ofsted is that you can use our tool called the Reading Dashboard. There are 2 dashboards. One is called the Summary Dashboard, which gives you a bit of overview about AR. But the Reading Dashboard is the thing that is really looking at your children's progress with regard to their STAR tests and their reading ages and their norm reference score. So the Reading Dashboard not only shows you growth, but it also shows you something called an SGP score, a Student Growth Percentile. And the Student Growth Percentile, very briefly, is a measure that enables you to have a look at a child's progress in comparison to their academic peers. Now, because of the change in assessment that's gone on in the last few years, national comparisons are not easy to come across apart from at the end of key stages. But with the reading dashboard, you get a progress measure, an SGP measure for your children twice a year, which indicates their progress, and you'll see a picture of this on the slide that's coming up next. And that will give you a good idea of whether your children are making the progress that they should be making. You also have your screening report, which some of you may well know about, and on that you can compare the details looking at the percentile ranks, the scaled scores and norm reference scores. So this slide shows you just a quick screenshot of one page on the dashboard, and we're putting on workshops and webinars about the dashboard and the student growth percentiles coming up. So have a look at those if you really want to have a look at particularly this ability to demonstrate progress as opposed to just growth between two particular scores. If you notice the fan shape with the green, yellow and red fan, the blue circle on the left is showing, this is showing for a class. This is indicating the reading age of the class at the beginning of the year. And then on the right-hand side, you have two reading ages given. One is the projected one, which shows where the children will be at the end of the year if they get typical growth, and then you have a predicted score based on their test results and how well they're doing on their test results. So you can see, are they predicted to get where you need them to be in terms of their progress? You can see a yellow diamond, that's a student growth percentile result, and you get 2 of those each year. And this will give you a national comparison as well as comparison between children in your school and within your class. So it's a tool certainly to investigate in the future. So coming towards the end of our session now, let's think about the inspection handbook, which also has some important information in, and critically, of course, understanding the teaching standards, where teachers must, no matter what their subject, more relevant obviously in secondary than primary, the subject aspect, but promote high standards of literacy across the curriculum. Here you can see some data that will help you look at that and help you to develop your quality of teaching and learning assessment. There's a screenshot here of the screening report. Can you just give me a tick or a cross whether you use your screening report? If you're new to AR, then you might not have had a chance yet. Martin, I can see that you have. So, Chris, you've used yours as well. It's a very useful report, and one of the things that it enables you to do is to identify children who are falling behind, children who need intervention, and most helpfully it enables you, although there are benchmarks already put in there, you can put benchmarks into this report which enable you to amend the benchmark so that you can see benchmarks that are a lot higher, looking at Ofsted outstanding levels and Ofsted good levels, as opposed to just on target levels. So you can amend those benchmarks, and that's really helpful to see how well your students are on track to get good or outstanding in the current system. Underneath the screening report, if you've used it, you know it tells you the students and who are in which group. And there's also available to you now, you can contact the office or ask for one to be sent to you. We have now looked at the scaled scores. Remember, that's that mark out of 1,400 that you get as part of the data that every child gets, along with their norm reference score and their reading age. They're scaled scores that are required for different years in the curriculum. So what we've done is we've looked at the curriculum requirements for each year standard from year 1 up to year 11, and we have benchmarked the scaled score that you would want your children to be at the beginning of the year and at the end of each year. Here on the slide you can just see the benchmark scores for the end of Key Stage 1, 2 and 3. I think it's particularly useful to demonstrate, you know, if children are achieving higher than this, that, you know, they really have achieved that standard for that year. So it's very helpful to have that to back up your teaching, your teacher judgments as well. You can also identify benchmarks for your gifted and talented, your SEN students, and particularly, you know, if you're in primary in the younger years, the scale score for when they become an independent reader, which you can see there is a score of 174. The document asks you to how do you intervene to provide support for literacy. So perhaps you would just care to share any ideas around your interventions in chat very quickly, because that might be useful to have people be able to share those ideas. So if you look at your data, what kind of interventions do you put in for students who are not meeting the year group benchmarks? Can you put an idea of what you do in chat? That would be great, thanks. So Hannah is saying we have books where we record concerns from a weekly check, and then daily checks are done by TAs, useful, and obviously you can pick up issues. If you've got AR reading practice happening daily, then your status of the class can help you to look at that as well. Anything from anybody else? Thank you, Hannah. Sue, tutoring in small groups based on students' need, reading clubs, boys' story time, daily readers, one-to-one interventions, small group interventions following half-termly assessments. So it seems to me like everybody is picking up well on the interventions. So one of the things you might care to use from AR is that progress monitoring for interventions that you find in the same area of STAR, where you have the screening reports as well, because that could help you measure in more detail the impact of your interventions. So that's great, really useful ideas there. Thank you very much. I noticed Lucy says reading comprehension intervention, and I'll just mention to everyone that again in the customer section of the renlearn.co.uk website, if you look in the resources part of that, you will find a large booklet written by teacher colleagues on our staff that has, I think it's nearly 80 pages of resources and things which will help to support, to develop all the aspects of reading comprehension that might be useful to you. So do check that out. It's a resource where you can look at the skill you want to teach, and there are resources that you can click on that will help you to teach those particular skills. As I say, it's very large, very comprehensive, and can be really helpful for you. So coming to a close now, let's just pull it together by just picking up and highlighting once again sources of evidence that you could provide inspectors with. This is in the School Inspection Handbook, section 156. So obviously your evaluations, any evaluations that you do from your middle leaders or your senior leaders, from your quality assurance. If you have transition points in your school, like from Key Stage 1 to 2 and so on, then you can use your longitudinal data from Renaissance. If you're in Key Stage 3, you can particularly demonstrate that Key Stage 3 is demanding as far as reading is concerned. It's something that Ofsted seem to come through in quite a strong sort of flavour in many of the recent Ofsted reports that I've read about is their reading challenging enough. So you can point this out at any key stage by showing the ZPDs and that kind of things of the books that the children are using. Again, pupil enjoyment, are they enjoying challenge as well as things that are, you know, easy for them? We have a booklet that you, again, can get from the training section in the customers part of the website that will add to what we've talked about today. You want to think about the impact of the teaching of literacy, including reading. Listening to children reading and discussing reading with them is still happening in primary schools, and it's even happening in year 7 and 8 in secondary schools as well. And they're looking at not just the low attaining children, but also the most able. And you might want to review, you know, are you giving them enough time to practice? If they're only having 20 minutes a day, you might want to think about extending that if you possibly can fit it in. After all, if they can read well, then they can access all aspects of the rest of the curriculum really effectively. And if they're able to read well, then they're generally able to concentrate and persevere for longer periods of time, which again is something that Ofsted looks for in terms of the outstanding lesson grade descriptor. So here's a couple of points that might be useful as far as that's concerned. Make sure that your AR sessions you've planned who you're going to speak to. You don't need to write detailed plans or anything like that. But, you know, if you are using a status of the class record sheet, we have examples in your AR site and also on our website. You know who you need to speak to if there is issues. You can plan to talk to everyone and have formative assessment conversations with everyone using their AR data during the course of a week or a fortnight. And a piece of data I mentioned earlier, which is really helpful, is to, once you set those points targets, you'll be able to see your engaged time data. And if you're getting 30 minutes of engaged time, then you know children are really beginning to have an impact of their reading on their ability to read. So their reading ages should be going up. Again, point out your book stock is developing their understanding of people and communities beyond their immediate experience, and make sure they're challenging. And, you know, do your learning walks. There's some examples of some of the questions to ask there for learning walks when you just pop in and see how things are going on without full-blown observations or anything like that. So 3 minutes, wow, I managed to get it in. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening and taking part. I hope you found that useful. I can see there's been lots of useful information shared and lots of questions asked. I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to join us. It's been great having you with us, and I hope that you'll join us for some of our other webinars that could be helpful to you. And don't forget, the more questions you have, ask away. We only want to help you to ensure that you are going to really get the best out of your Renaissance Place and Accelerated Reader. Thanks very much, everyone. I'll hand you over to